Hello and welcome to Rebecca Assimilates. I have recently joined the wonderful world of Instagram, and a few of the hashtags I follow, the writing hashtags, I've seen people posting on there quite a few times recently about dialogue tags and words that can be used instead of using the word said, as in he said, she said. Kind of makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. I think because when I was a new writer, I would have really paid attention to this. And I feel like, if you're writing for like young children, then yes, use fluffy words. But if you're writing fiction for adults, or young adults, or middle grade for that matter, then there's really nothing wrong with he said or she said. I'm going to give you some examples of the word suggestions that could be used instead of he said or she said. Exclaimed, agreed, chortled, hissed, mentioned, announced, declared, interjected, protested, jeered. And I could go on, there's like 300, 400 of these word alternatives to said. And I feel like it makes writers who are easily influenced feel like there's something wrong with using the word said in a dialogue tag. And I don't feel like that's the right message to put out there. I mean, I know some of these words, like announced, maybe in a story there is an announcement, maybe they're at a meeting, maybe he does announce, but it's suitable then. It's not suitable just to use in a normal conversation between characters. Yeah, and I just feel like it made me feel like the wrong message was being put across. And I feel like I'd like to explain why, because dialogue tags, they're like a tool. They're just for a reader to understand who is speaking, what character is speaking. They're like a reassurance for a reader. They kind of act in the same way as like speech quotes act, so that when we read, we know that someone's speaking. A dialogue tag allows us to know who was speaking when we need to know, when we can't work it out for ourselves. And I feel like they don't need to be dressed up or anything like that. I have a quote from author Chuck Wendig, because I love him, and it's from his Terrible Minds blog back in 2015, but it's still very relevant today. And it's basically, certainly you can use other dialogue verbs other than said, but usually you shouldn't. And that's the thing, usually you shouldn't. Of course you can when it's really necessary, when it's needed, and of course you can. Writers have got free will, use whatever frilly words you like, but usually you shouldn't. All you need to do is write said. He also went on in the article to explain how communication gestures between characters are also not proper dialogue tag verbs, and they are often used as dialogue tag verbs. So like, you can't sort of have a bit of speech and then say he shrugged, which actually is something I was a bit confused about. So I'm actually really glad that I stumbled upon this bit of information, because that's clarified some things for me. And we're all learners here, aren't we? And yeah, so it's basically, if it's going to be some kind of action of a character, you need to have, it can't go after the comma at the end of the speech, because it's not, you can't shrug out words. It's not a proper verb dialogue tag for someone speaking. It's an action, so that's fine, but there just needs to be the full stop after the speech and then a whole new sentence of the action, and that is fine. Yep, so I'm very glad that I learned how to do that while researching this. Another thing is, when there's two characters that are speaking, when it's a conversation between two characters, dialogue tags aren't as necessary as when there's more than two characters. I mean, more than two characters, it gets a bit confusing. I get confused when I'm writing scenes with more than two, but let's just think about two characters for now. So basically, they get in, like, there's an exchange, isn't there, when two people are speaking, like a back and forth of words, a tennis match of words, and readers, they adjust to this rhythm, they expect it. They don't need, after every bit of speech, to know Tony said this, Sheila said that, Tony said, Sheila said, he said, she said, he said, she said. They don't need that, because they already know. If there is a break in the speech from one character, maybe one character doesn't say anything and then the other character speaks again, maybe that at that point, that's when you kind of need to think, yes, maybe I should put a very simple she said dialogue tag in there just to reassure the readers of who's speaking. And that is when dialogue tags are needed, just when they are actually necessary. And that's also the wonderful thing about when you get people to read the drafts of your work. It's kind of better to have dialogue tags that are minimal and wait and see if any comments come back where people say, yeah, I really didn't understand this little bit of character, communication, conversation. I wasn't sure who was speaking, I couldn't follow it. And that's when you know you need to add a tag in. And that's what dialogue tags are for. They're like anchors. They're just signals to a reader to let them know who's speaking. And that is it. I have another example from a book called Acid Row by Minette Walters. It's a wonderful book. It's about a paedophile. Well, it's not about a paedophile at all, but it's about the rumour of a paedophile that has been placed in a council estate known as Acid Row. And the ripple effect, the rumours and the misunderstandings really, and the exaggerations cause other people who live in this estate. And basically the little bit of character speech that I'm going to read you is between two characters, so we can see the nice back and forth, and also the lack of dialogue tags because they are just not needed. I think as a general rule, if you're really not sure where to put them, I think it's every fifth exchange of a bit of conversation, that's when you put in a, oh, he said, or she said. But really, you don't need to put them in until you get to a point where you think, yeah, people are confused now. I'm just going to add it in just so the readers definitely know who's speaking. This extract is between a teenage girl, 16-year-old teenage girl called Franny, and a detective called Tyler. Okay, so it's a little bit long-winded, just a tiny bit long-winded. Stick with it. I think it's necessary because I want you to see the back and the forth and how dialogue tags just aren't needed and how it still isn't confusing. He's so good looking now, she said, and he was really sweet at the beginning. Good looking men always are, said Tyler unsympathetically, fingering the rut on his forehead. Until they get inside your knickers and find you're no more exciting than the last girl they had. You sound like my mother. Is there anything else you can think of that might help me? Did he get any phone calls? There was a message for him when we got back to the hotel. It was in an envelope that had been pushed under the door. He seemed quite excited about it. He made me take a shower so he could call someone. It might have been to do with that. He told me to go to sleep after. Said he wasn't interested in sex. And this was 2:00 in the morning. Yes. What did the message say? Dunno. Did you try to find it after he left? Maybe. And it wasn't in the bin. Did you answer the phone for him while he wasn't there? They were all on his mobile. Did you hear any conversations that might have been with a child? He used to go out of the room. A pause. Most of them sounded like business. He's got problems with some of his houses. What sort of problems? Dunno, he went ballistic every time I asked. Said people were stealing from him. He said it would all be sorted next week. Tyler stared at his office wall. Who was he talking to? I really like that bit, and I feel like if you can see this nice chunk of back and forth of dialogue between two characters. There's no he said, she said. There's no he announced or she proclaimed. It's just not necessary because it's like we know who's speaking. It's obvious. Maybe it's a little bit easier because they're quite clipped sentences. There's a lot of them are just one-word sentences, but that's quite a natural conversation really for the situation that was happening. But even the longer sentences, they don't have the he said, she said because it is quite obvious, and unless you really need a dialogue tag, you just don't need to put it in. To summarise, so dialogue tags are markers of reassurance for a reader. We don't need to go crazy and frivolous with them. it'd be like at a wedding, and one of the bridesmaids or one of the guests is wearing a really crazy hat. And people are kind of thinking, do they not know that that hat is taking away from the bride? You know, the main focus of this event, the bride, that hat is really outshining her, and people here like are supposed to compliment the bride, not take away from her big day. And in a way, character dialogue and dialogue tags are a little bit like that, because dialogue tags, you don't want them to in any way take away from the actual character dialogue that is happening. You don't want them to steal that limelight. You want them to complement it. And we definitely want our dialogue tags to be subtle and modest and simple, and in some ways just disappear when our readers are reading what we write. You know, they just become invisible. Like, as the readers read the chunks of character conversations, you kind of want the he said, she said to just not be there, that just them not have to think about it, just the way they don't have to think about question marks and commas and exclamation marks and things like that. It's a tool, it is a writing tool, and we just want it to be effortless. We don't want to take away from the actual main wonderful action and character discovery that dialogue allows us to see. And frivolous dialogue tags take away from the lovely flow that a reader gets when they're reading, and they interrupt it, and we do not want our readers to be interrupted. We want them to really enjoy these dialogue moments and sort of take them as the exciting parts that we want them to be. That's it for today. Please leave me comments below about what you think about everything I've said, please, and how you write dialogue tags, if you do this, if you don't, if you like your big frivolous words, and why. Have a really lovely day writing, and I will see you soon.